This fatty prince was so clumsy that when he tried out his family sword, he ended up stabbing himself with it. He barely survived the incident, but something within him changed completely. He stopped eating constantly and instead devoted himself to training. The former fatty began running all day and practiced his mana control whenever he took a break. He trained day and night, swinging a wooden sword repeatedly. He ignored his fatigue, and even when the instructor told him to stop, he refused to listen. He continued over and over again, even in the rain, until his hands were rubbed raw and bleeding. Within just a month, his wooden sword finally broke. Looking at his worn and damaged hands, he refined every movement to perfection and felt completely satisfied with the results. However, the human body had its limits, and he eventually lost consciousness from exhaustion. Even so, the training never truly stopped. After some time, he was no longer obese, and even his sword master was shocked by his mastery of swordsmanship and mana techniques. So what caused this drastic change? The truth was that his body had been possessed by the soul within the sword he stabbed himself with, and that sword was anything but ordinary. This was the story from the perspective of a hero who had been reincarnated as a sword across countless eras. The blade had been wielded by many legends, but the most significant bond it ever formed was with a single man, Leonberg. Despite being born a peasant, Leonberg earned the title of sword saint through sheer grit and wielded the magnificent blade with unmatched skill. Though the sword passed through many hands, Leonberg was the only one it ever considered a true companion of the heart. They journeyed across continents together, spending decades cleansing the world of evil. Eventually, the day arrived when they faced the final foe, the white dragon of the Frost Mountains. The colossal, silver-scaled beast forced Leonberg to exhaust every ounce of strength before he finally slew it. Peace was restored to the kingdom, and Leonberg was granted the chance to ascend as sovereign. However, the victory came at a heavy cost. With the world once again bathed in peace, the sword was laid to rest after centuries of slaughter. The blade was passed down through Leonberg's bloodline for generations, yet no successor could fill the void left by his beloved companion. With every new prince, the heirs grew. Increasingly incompetent and uninspiring, this mediocrity reached its peak when the sword was passed down to a worthless, obese youth. The moment the fat prince swung his rightful weapon, the sword was appalled. This ill-mannered brat had zero understanding of swordsmanship. The blade immediately ran a status check, and a system window displayed everything it needed to know. The boy's name was Adrian Thunberg, a 16-year-old obese youth whose abilities were reduced several times over. His traits described him perfectly as useless, with almost no stamina. On top of that, he suffered from extreme mana sensitivity. Although his surname marked him as Leonberg's descendant, his pathetic stats suggested otherwise. He was so weak that he struggled just to lift the sword. Despite being all bark and no bite, his constant boasting grated on the sword's nerves. After shouting the sword saint's name, Adrian poured all his strength into lifting the blade and began swinging it aimlessly, terrifying everyone nearby. As he charged blindly, the servants barely had time to scatter. The stupidity reached its peak when the clumsy prince tripped over his own feet and accidentally pointed the blade toward his stomach as he fell. There was no twist. He truly impaled himself. Horrified, everyone rushed to his side. Meanwhile, the sword itself was having the worst experience imaginable. Strangely enough, the boy's death was not entirely meaningless. Adrian had failed to inherit any qualities worthy of Leonberg. He stood out only for the wrong reasons, arrogant despite his lack of talent and endlessly greedy. He embodied the 7 deadly sins, and had he ever ascended the throne, the kingdom would have been doomed. That fatal mistake, however, changed the kingdom's fate. The sword possessed Adrian's body the moment it became soulless. Within days, the castle's staff noticed a drastic shift in his behavior. He acted as though he had lost his memories and even refused to acknowledge the instructor who had once tolerated his nonsense. Soon, the king arrived to see his son. At a glance, the sword recognized him as the boy's father and was surprised that he appeared far more respectable than his son. The king found Adrian's lack of manners disturbing as the boy failed to greet him. The instructor attempted to defend the prince, claiming memory loss. Royal Knights suggested a medical examination. After inspection, the physician confirmed there was no physical brain damage, concluding that trauma had likely caused amnesia. The king remained unconvinced and warned that forgetting his past would not erase his sins. Losing his memories also meant losing the lessons he should have learned. The thought of starting over infuriated him, and after expressing his disappointment, he left. The sword, now inhabiting Adrian's body, found the treatment unbearable and wondered how terrible the boy's reputation must have been. Fortunately, there was one person who treated him kindly, his mother. She adored her son unconditionally and was simply grateful he was alive. The sword felt pity for the woman who mourned a son who was already gone. After she left, reality weighed heavily on the sword. He had killed his friend's descendant, even though he was meant to protect them. Still, dwelling on regret would change nothing. The least he could do was fix the damage left behind. This body was weak and obese, but he knew his first step: build strength. He attempted to forge a mana heart, but his efforts failed repeatedly as his body rejected mana. Just as despair set in, a maid arrived with a tonic prepared by the queen. Unlike the original Adrian, he recognized the mana within it and drank it without hesitation. The tonic worked. Over several days, he finally succeeded in creating a mana heart, though the pain was excruciating. He endured the agony and emerged successful. For the first time, the mana heart truly belonged to him. A system notification appeared, this time addressed to him. Due to his weak body, only limited abilities were accessible, granting him two authorities: third eye and third ear. These abilities allowed enhanced vision and hearing, though only within limits. Exhaustion soon followed, as mana consumption overwhelmed him, and darkness claimed his sight. Of course, Adrian did not appreciate these restrictions that had been imposed to limit his potential. Back when he was merely a sword, he had been able to see and hear everything in all directions. Now, however, he could barely squeeze out enough mana to activate the third ear and third eye for even a brief moment. Even so, he remained optimistic. Once his overall mana capacity increased, he believed he would be capable of far more than his current limitations allowed. While his mana capacity was low, his appetite was just as massive, and he found himself starving in his relentless pursuit of power. The sword nearly forgot that he was inhabiting a human body and would need time to adjust to its needs. After a while, he was reunited with his doting mother, who appeared far happier than before. The source of her joy stemmed from the fact that her son had consumed every last drop of the tonic she had sent him. As she showered him with maternal affection, a new figure entered the scene. When his mother asked whether he recognized this person, Adrian boldly denied it. The intimidating man was her brother, Adrian's uncle, and she had hoped that he might help restore her son's lost memories. However, the uncle held a different opinion. He believed the memories Adrian once possessed were insignificant to begin with, and that attempting to recover such a useless collection would be a waste of effort. This blunt remark made Adrian realize that the man harbored a deep-seated resentment toward him. For the moment, the uncle promised only one thing: he would help Adrian shed his excess fat and gain muscle. Expecting anything beyond his current capabilities, he claimed, would be unreasonable. Even so, the mother expressed gratitude for that small concession. Meanwhile, the way the man stared at Adrian with an unsettling intensity made it clear that things were not going to be easy for him. In the next scene, Adrian was slammed hard into the ground. The brute loomed over the harmless boy like a starving wolf, making his intentions unmistakably clear. Adrian was told that he was not even allowed to breathe unless permission was granted. Only if the uncle felt inclined would he consider teaching Adrian the family's most sacred and coveted swordsmanship. Naturally, this treatment infuriated Adrian beyond belief. As the very being responsible for the success of this family's sword style, he found their ungrateful behavior humiliating. Fueled by anger, Adrian stood back up and vowed that within 6 months, he would force his uncle to acknowledge him. If he failed, he was willing to become a puppet to his uncle's whims. However, if he succeeded, he demanded that his uncle grant him a single wish. Mistaking the boy's confidence for sheer arrogance, the proud man immediately accepted the terms. Internally, Adrian assessed his situation. Despite declaring victory so boldly, he understood all too well that this body was going to put him through absolute hell. He began wrapping his body in mana and sprinted with the goal of burning away his excess fat. Suddenly, his uncle sensed the presence of mana within Adrian's body and was shocked to his very core. He stopped Adrian immediately and asked whether he had already formed a mana heart. Adrian seized the opportunity to boast, eager to see his uncle's reaction. Instead of admiration, the uncle appeared disappointed, but not for the reason Adrian expected. He questioned who had instructed Adrian to develop a mana heart, explaining that it was a technique reserved for low-grade, bottom-tier mercenaries. With that single revelation, all of Adrian's confidence collapsed. The method he had learned was apparently worthless. Sometime later, his confidence, once inflated like his former belly, had completely deflated. As Adrian reflected on his uncle's words, the man demonstrated his power by forming a mana ring and striking him with it. That single blow shattered the mana Adrian had relied on so heavily. The technique, known as mana chains, was capable of crushing the aura produced by a mana heart. It was also far easier and more practical to use. Even the Count Eli family, who had stubbornly clung to mana heart traditions, had fallen into ruin a century ago. As a result, no one attempted to use mana hearts anymore. Armed with this new knowledge, Adrian was forced to retreat and begin studying the basic theory of mana chains. Mana utilization was categorized into distinct systems. Mages primarily relied on mana circles, while knights wove mana chains. A knight's rank was determined by the number of chains they could weave, starting from a single chain and progressing through double, triple, quadruple, and finally the realm of the pentachain. After absorbing this crucial information, Adrian realized that his uncle had not been wrong after all. While reading, he also noticed a familiar keyword, Altrincham. This triggered a memory from the past, when a man named Ernest Altrincham had once sought him out. That man possessed strange arts that were neither swordsmanship nor magic. The recollection caused a smirk to form on Adrian's face, as though he had finally figured out his next step. A new day arrived, bringing renewed confidence. As Adrian stretched in preparation for training, his uncle appeared and asked whether he had read the books given to him the previous night. If he had, then he should have realized how foolish it was to create a mana heart. Contrary to expectations, Adrian's confidence had not diminished, it had doubled. The man confronted him, questioning whether he was truly that foolish or merely pretending to be ignorant. Adrian chose to let action speak for itself. He released his mana and corrected his uncle, stating that different mana hearts operated under different mechanisms. Predictably, the uncle dismissed his words, assuming Adrian was behaving like stubborn mercenaries who were overly confident in themselves, mercenaries who had failed to surpass even 2 chains. Still, the uncle issued a challenge. If Adrian truly believed himself different, he could prove it by defeating a double-chain knight. Should he succeed, the uncle promised to become his guardian just as Adrian's mother had wished. Adrian responded by questioning whether having his uncle as a guardian would even be beneficial. The remark struck deeply at the knight's honor. The man proclaimed his titles, Count of the Kingdom, Commander of the Northern Army, Master of the Black Lancers, and one of the 5 silver lions who served his majesty. As a quad-chain knight, he would not tolerate such insolence. To prove his authority, he released a terrifying amount of mana, so intense that it shattered the ground beneath his feet. The display made it painfully clear that this man was no ordinary opponent, and Adrian was learning that lesson the hard way. Before the situation escalated to the point where the young prince's life was in danger, the surrounding knights were forced to raise their weapons against the count. Later, Adrian lay sprawled on the floor like a sack of grain, completely drained from the grueling cardio meant to shed the stubborn fat clinging to his body. The arrogant image of the count lingered in his thoughts. If Adrian failed to defeat a double-chain knight, that smug, scar-faced man would look down on him for the rest of his life. Upon returning to his room, Adrian was greeted by the physician who had been waiting for him. As the physician attempted polite greetings, Adrian urged him to get straight to the point. The man explained that he had been ordered by the queen to heal the prince and help him recover faster. Adrian rejected the offer outright and chased the physician out of his room. He had no interest in magical healing. Healing magic functioned like time reversal, erasing micro-injuries and muscle wear, preventing natural growth and rendering his training meaningless. As Adrian finally sat down to eat, his older brother suddenly burst into the dining room. Of course, the sword did not recognize the loudmouth, so a nearby knight leaned in and quietly filled in the blanks. The man was revealed to be the 3rd prince, and it was immediately obvious that he was the typical toxic older brother. Even now, he had come only to mock Adrian over the recent incident where Adrian had impaled himself with his own sword and nearly died. Adrian showed no interest in responding to such transparent provocation, and instead suggested that his so-called elder brother find something productive to do with his time. Unfortunately, the attempt at dismissal only enraged the provocateur further. The rage-baiting brother took the bait and shifted to another rumor he had heard. According to whispers circulating the palace, Adrian had made a bet with Count Bellard. Since the wager involved facing a double-chain knight, the malicious brother eagerly volunteered himself as the opponent. Adrian had no idea who this dimwit fool even was. All he could think about was why every descendant of this family seemed unbearably annoying. The one who had just mocked him was identified as Prince Gillian, the 3rd prince, renowned for his exceptional swordsmanship and prodigious talent. Having formed 2 rings at the age of 4, he was undeniably a force to be reckoned with. Before the situation escalated further, a maid arrived and interrupted, presenting Adrian with a stack of letters. Adrian could not understand why so many letters had suddenly come his way when no one had shown interest in him before. His curiosity was piqued when he noticed their contents. Many of the letters requested duels with the prince, while others offered their senders as sparring partners. In short, every one of them was attempting to use Adrian as a free opportunity to challenge the prince and vent their frustrations. Adrian was genuinely offended by the sheer audacity of these people. He ordered the maid to write down the names of everyone who had sent a letter. In the following scene, Adrian was engaged in a training session when the northern commander suddenly tossed him a wooden sword. The man firmly believed that teaching the prince at least some level of swordsmanship was necessary. He refused to be blamed later for failing to instruct the prince properly. Adrian instinctively caught the weapon, slightly irritated that the man could not simply hand it to him properly. At that moment, his entire body jolted as his muscles spasmed violently without warning. This caused Bellard to wonder whether the boy had already received healing magic. Adrian taunted him for not realizing the reason despite being a knight. Healing magic, after all, merely returned muscles to their original state and prevented growth. Bellard agreed with the reasoning and admitted that he had never focused much on healing magic anyway. For now, he announced that he would demonstrate a technique and instructed Adrian to watch with utmost attention. The move was the kingdom's secret sword technique, used by knights to build their core foundation. Bellard swung his sword with overwhelming ferocity, slashing in every direction. His immaculate display concluded with a breathtaking spiral finish, leaving Adrian momentarily speechless. When Adrian questioned whether that technique was truly considered foundational for knights, Bellard took offense and explained that training weapons lacked sharpness, making basic techniques more suitable for learning proper swordsmanship. Suddenly, Adrian burst out laughing. He had realized how sword mastery had evolved over time. The legendary swordsmanship that once slew the mad dragon was now treated as nothing more than a basic training technique. Bellard's expression crumbled as he warned Adrian that such fundamentals would not be enough to win his bet. He suggested seeking instruction from another teacher afterward. Adrian rejected the idea outright, firmly believing that this technique alone was more than sufficient. Though slightly irritated, Bellard ultimately respected Adrian's resolve. Training resumed. Adrian practiced his swings while analyzing why the Dragon Slayer technique had been relegated to a lowly status. He realized that while techniques naturally evolved, Bellard's execution lacked the true spirit of dragon slaying. Those who abandoned the mana heart had forgotten how to breathe their own spirit into the sword, making it impossible for them to grasp the true value of the Dragon Slayer technique. Lost in thought, Adrian was abruptly interrupted when Bellard clashed swords with him, correcting his stance and instructing him to channel strength into the blade rather than his arms. He struck Adrian's belly and legs, forcing him to adjust his posture and evenly distribute power through his body. Adrian acknowledged that his teacher was absolutely correct. His current body was undeniably weak. Still, he refused to accept that the technique was worthless and resolved to prove its value through his own actions. Days passed as the grueling training continued. After a full month of effort, the system congratulated Adrian on completing a mission. His severe obesity had been reduced to normal obesity, allowing his metabolism to adapt and his body to change accordingly. The clumsiness trait disappeared, and further exercise would only sharpen him. His mana capacity grew steadily, and the mana sensitivity disorder trait vanished as well. With every swing, Adrian gained confidence, knowing how far he had come. His mindset was focused entirely on improving by 1% each day. Once again, his sword was crushed by his teacher, who had repeatedly warned him to stop. They stood silently beneath the pouring rain as Adrian's hands trembled from exhaustion. Blood dripped from his bruised grip as he looked at his uncle in confusion. Turning back toward the training dummy, he realized that he had completely severed both its limbs with a single strike. Adrian was left speechless. Bellard roared at him for being reckless, warning that such a blow could have caused real damage if he had been wielding a real sword. Adrian's hands were covered in calluses and cuts as the system rewarded him with the super concentration trait. As fatigue overwhelmed him, Adrian's final thought was the realization that he could have died moments earlier. Bellard caught him before he collapsed, staring at the prince's face while commenting on his stubborn nature. Later, Adrian woke up in his bed, realizing he had collapsed mid-training. He had pushed his body far beyond its limits. He recalled his time as a sword when he had been perfect in every way. His wielders had included nameless war heroes, swordmasters, mercenary kings, and even the founder of the kingdom itself. Together, they had won wars, slain countless monsters, and paved the way for heroes to rise. Greenhorn had always been an exceptional advisor and teacher, which was why Adrian continued to swing his sword relentlessly, striving to reach that state of perfection once again. Still, he acknowledged that his current body was too weak and would collapse without proper rest. A month had passed since the creation of his mana heart, during which his mana reserves had steadily grown. Meditating, Adrian prepared himself to advance to the next level his system now allowed. His body could freely draw more mana from the mana heart, undergoing expansion and evolution. His physical constitution adapted accordingly, granting tangible benefits by the end of the process. Eager to test the results, Adrian grabbed his sword and swung. Having reached the level of a sword learner, he accessed the most basic stage of aura, evidenced by the flowing waves trailing his blade. The basics had been successfully learned. In the training session that followed, Bellard spoke about certain rumors spreading throughout the kingdom regarding the bet. Because of this, he was forced to train the prince even harder, though he was clearly annoyed that Adrian was not simply hurrying up to find a sparring partner already. The person who came to mind was none other than the third prince of the empire. Even so, Adrian knew he could not directly face a double-chain warrior yet, so he wondered whether starting with a single-chain opponent would be more reasonable. He turned to Carls to ask for an update on his task. The knight responded by assuring the prince that he had done exactly as instructed and had sent sparring requests everywhere. However, Carls expressed concern about why the prince wanted practice sessions with so many people. The reason was simple. Every one of these opponents harbored resentment toward the arrogant and annoying prince and were intentionally using this opportunity to hurt him. Adrian was fully aware of their intentions, and that was precisely why he did not mind. His only condition was for his uncle to act as referee for each session. Ensuring that no one died during the matches was a simple responsibility, and Bellard showed no resistance to the idea. Several days later, the first training match was held. The challenger stared in awe at the majestic palace of the infamous scoundrel prince. His name was Taylor Tahim, the second son of an ordinary baronial family. Years ago, the disgraceful and arrogant prince had publicly denounced him while ridiculing his older brother and father, crushing the Tahim family's honor in an instant. Since then, the family had lost its standing and become a subject of ridicule. That humiliation was why Taylor had come to exact his revenge in this fight. Shortly after arriving, he met the prince and greeted him with utmost respect. Taylor introduced himself as an apprentice knight of the Single Chain, though his introduction dragged on far longer than necessary for an unofficial match. Adrian casually dismissed him as weak, confirming Taylor's belief that the prince was just as arrogant as rumored. Bellard immediately sensed the young man's vitriol and ordered him to compose himself, reminding him that the fight had not yet begun. Taylor's murderous intent vanished the instant the northern commander stepped forward, turning him into an awestruck admirer. Even Adrian found himself thinking that his uncle deserved the title of prince more than he did, a thought Bellard countered by mocking Adrian for having been a spoiled noble brat in the past. With that, both fighters were instructed to take their positions. The two locked eyes. Taylor was the first to release his aura, confidence written across his face as he lunged forward to punish the prince. He leapt into the air for a downward slash, but with a single glance, Adrian identified multiple wasted movements in the apprentice knight's attack. Adrian blocked the strike cleanly, stunning Taylor with the sheer stability of a mana heart. Taylor leapt back to regain distance, questioning how a mana heart could possibly block a mana chain. His observation was technically correct, except for one detail. He was only using a single chain, which made the difference negligible and caused nothing more than a slight tingling sensation. Suddenly, the spectators began hearing a strange sound emanating from Adrian's sword, a phenomenon that stunned even Bellard. It was known as a sword cry. Taylor, refusing to accept the prince's strength, charged again with an even heavier attack. Adrian defended it effortlessly, and the clash escalated into a full sword exchange, blades colliding as both fighters retreated. At that point, Adrian began feeling the strain. Mana chains were fundamentally different from mana hearts, and a single exchange had nearly caused his mana to crash and backflow simultaneously. His opponent's expression, strained and uncertain, was a sight to behold. Adrian taunted Taylor for being overly emotional, reminding him that as the second son of his family, he should learn restraint. Regaining his composure, Adrian sank into deeper concentration. He invoked an awakened spell, recognizing that the sword, whether magical or divine, was part of his very soul. The mana heart accepted his will as its first color, imbuing itself over its previously colorless state. The dormant will of the dragon slayer awakened, merging the sword's memories with a heart designed specifically to slaughter dragons. The skill heart of the dragon slayer activated as Adrian entered a draconic state. Empowered by the dragon's will, the once unimposing prince now radiated crimson aura, resembling the embodiment of death itself. Taylor froze in terror at the sight, while Bellard immediately demanded the duel be stopped. Driven by overwhelming determination, Adrian launched forward with lethal intent. A flashback revealed that Adrian had previously asked his uncle to stop him if he ever lost control and attempted to kill his opponent. That moment had arrived. Bellard intervened instantly, activating a skill that sent Adrian crashing into a wall, stopping him just in time. The surrounding knights rushed in from all directions, believing the prince had narrowly escaped assassination. Though the offense was grave, Adrian forced himself upright and ordered them to stand down. He admitted that he had instructed Bellard to act, though he had not expected to be struck unconscious. Adrian collapsed, and when he next awoke, his mana heart was violently pounding from the backlash. His uncle was an absolute monster with incomparable strength, and taking that strike head-on had triggered severe backflow. Fortunately, there were no lasting aftereffects, and the match had ended in Adrian's victory. Adrian laughed weakly as Bellard arrived to discuss the fight. Bellard remarked on the sword style Adrian had used, emphasizing that he had never taught him such a technique. Adrian explained that he had immersed himself in the sword's essence and become one with it. What troubled Bellard was the fact that a prince with no real combat experience had displayed godlike murderous intent. The spirit surrounding Adrian reeked of bloodlust, something Bellard could not deny. Adrian was shocked, having expected a corny lecture instead. Bellard scoffed, explaining that he was a soldier first and foremost, one who walked the path of victory by any means necessary. Even so, he still took issue with Adrian's bloodlust. Adrian argued that a weapon could not distinguish friend from foe and insisted he was working to correct his flaws. His maternal uncle watched him closely, wondering whether the boy would one day be consumed by his inner demons. After 3 days of sparring sessions, Taylor stood, defeated as Adrian thanked him for his cooperation. Unfortunately, Taylor had not achieved his revenge, and Adrian even teased him for failing to get what he wanted. Adrian instructed his maid to bring a special gift intended for the Tahim family. He acknowledged that the former prince had committed many wrongs and that the gift could not fully make amends, but it was a start. Taylor was stunned by the drastic change in the scoundrel prince's behavior, while Adrian dismissed him bluntly, remarking that cleaning up the original prince's mess was not his responsibility. News of the scoundrel prince's sparring sessions spread rapidly throughout the kingdom. Many warriors eagerly challenged him, expecting to put the weak prince in his place. Yet after countless practice sessions, there were no reports of Adrian suffering defeat. Instead, the warriors returned with positive impressions, describing the first prince as kind and benevolent. Their attitudes shifted so dramatically that ordinary citizens suspected they had been silenced or brainwashed by the royal family. Ironically, when this news reached Adrian, it infuriated him. The only reason those warriors stayed silent was because of how sadly they got smoked in their fights. Adrian viewed these nobles as fools and a waste of space, but his uncle mocked him for fitting the same description himself. Feeling fed up, the first prince turned to his most recent opponent and politely, but firmly instructed him to go spread the results of the sparring sessions. This time, Adrian hoped that the truth would silence his critics and put an end to the rumors. However, the very next day, even more rumors began circulating. This time, people claimed that the fat prince was fabricating the outcomes of the matches to protect himself. No matter what he did, he could not catch a break. Refusing to waste energy on nobles, Adrian poured all his frustration into training. Each swing of his sword became more ferocious than the last, slicing through the air with blazing mana. His mana heart burned with vitality as he turned to Carl's and asked about the remaining sparring partners. The knight explained that Adrian would be meeting his final opponent that very day. By now, apprentice knights were no longer a match for the first prince, but Carl's reassured him that this last opponent was a true knight who had mastered her sword. She had been dissatisfied with her family's techniques, and had joined the knight order to further hone her skills. The description intrigued Adrian as he welcomed the arrival of Arwen Korgan. Arwen stepped into the arena as ordinary knights murmured her reputation. She was known as a warrior of the Iron Light Knight Order, nicknamed the flower blooming on the cliff, the thorny rose, and even the woman who breaks hearts. With her elegant stride and striking presence, her beauty was undeniable. The fact that she had agreed to face the first prince was praise in itself. Spectators were convinced that Arwen would thoroughly humiliate the prince. The Iron Lion Knights were considered an elite order, and Arwen was a probationary knight whose promotion was already assured. The question remained why Adrian had drawn such a talented opponent. Apparently, a misunderstanding in the past had led to bad blood between them. Adrian asked one of his maids to recount what had happened, and she revealed that the former prince had harassed Arwen. The reckless behavior had understandably earned her deep resentment. Adrian felt exhausted by the misdeeds of his former self. The maid described how the fat prince had laid hands on Arwen, prompting her to taunt him for treating knights as personal property. His wounded ego had driven him to lash out and insult her appearance, behavior entirely in line with a scoundrel noble. Looking at Arwen now, the word ugly never crossed Adrian's mind. Arwen lowered herself formally to pay her respects, convinced that he had not changed at all. Adrian tried to reassure her that he was different now, but judging by her furious expression, it was obvious he was about to be beaten senseless. Count Bellard Hard arrived as the referee and allowed Arwen to formally introduce herself. After her greeting, Bellard jokingly warned her to be careful, remarking that the young prince wielded a surprisingly fierce blade. With that, the match began. As both fighters took their positions, Arwen's stance radiated cold determination. Adrian, on the other hand, was eager to experience the skill of a true knight. Arwen surged forward with refined movement, launching the first strike. Adrian blocked it, but the immense mana difference caused severe backflow, forcing blood from his mouth. Arwen pressed the attack relentlessly, her strikes precise and overwhelming. The two exchanged blows continuously, but Adrian was being tossed around, completely at her mercy. She moved in for a decisive strike, forcing Adrian to activate his dragon lair state and release bloodlust. The sudden surge stunned Arwen, and her blade was deflected. She retreated to reassess, breathing heavily as she observed Adrian's sword style. Adrian himself was barely holding together. Despite being a single-ring user, Arwen was unlike anyone he had faced before. Adrian activated the skill judgment, revealing her strengths, weaknesses, and even her personality traits. Being able to perceive her level despite limited usage confirmed that defeating her was possible. Crimson aura erupted from Adrian as Arwen responded in kind. Both fighters charged at chaotic speeds, signaling the true start of the battle. Minutes later, both were exhausted, evenly matched at the peak of their duel. Bellard intervened and called off the match, postponing it until the next day. Adrian claimed he had been about to finish the fight, while Arwen mocked him with the same remark. Both were unwilling to back down, but Bellard insisted they receive treatment. A healer approached Adrian, but he ignored them, glaring at Arwen, who returned his hostility in kind. The second day ended in another stalemate. By the third day, neither warrior was willing to yield. Arwen's skill was undeniable, and Adrian lasting this long proved his own growth. Before the final round, Adrian spoke up. Arwen assumed he was about to apologize and refused outright, determined to reclaim her pride properly. Adrian never intended to apologize. Instead, he proposed a wager. The loser would grant the winner a single wish of any kind. The knights immediately protested, deeming it dangerous for a royal prince to make such a vow. Adrian silenced them and asked for Arwen's opinion. Though bound by her position as a royal knight, Arwen accepted the challenge now that she had a fair chance. The third round began with chaotic exchanges as both fought to crush the other's spirit. Adrian unleashed a movement so swift that it stunned the prodigious knight. In just one day, his speed had skyrocketed. The fight intensified, but this time the tide had turned. Adrian dominated the battlefield, forcing Arwen back and even grazing her face. Pressing forward, he launched a decisive strike faster than she could defend. Their swords clashed, one blade shattering and flying into the air. Arwen dropped to her knees as the spectators witnessed the victor. Unable to accept the outcome, she watched as Prince Adrian decisively claimed victory. As for his reward, Adrian stated his wish plainly. Prince Adrian Leon Burke declared that he wanted her allegiance, not ownership in any crude sense. Meanwhile, Carls reflected on earning his position as a royal guard, recalling the prince's relentless training even through storms. Back in the present, the guards were horrified by the implication of Adrian's wish, especially involving a knight. Arwen asked quietly if that was truly what the prince desired. Our boy confirmed it, adding that she was currently only an apprentice knight who had failed to defeat a mere scoundrel prince. That was exactly why what he wanted from her now was the full potential of the knight called Arwen Kurgan. This clarification softened the atmosphere and surprised her, while Adrian declared that he wanted a loyal knight, one who would not guard him out of royal obligation alone, but one who would stand by him through thick and thin. Thanks to his scanning ability, Adrian could already foresee Arwen's exceptional talent in sword mastery, which only reinforced his decision to claim her as his knight. The story then shifted to her past. As a young girl, Arwen had longed to become a knight and was among the very best of her generation. Despite her talent, she was never given the recognition she deserved. As a result, she trained even harder, pushing herself to defeat every opponent she faced. After surpassing every apprentice knight she knew, her results were nothing short of astounding. Even so, she was still not recognized as a proper knight. Now, however, she was finally receiving genuine acknowledgement. The first prince himself was offering her trust, potential, and a future. She could hardly believe his words. Because of that, she asked Adrian to promise her one thing, to treat her as a knight first and a woman second. If he could do that, she would obey his every command. Adrian met her gaze and accepted without hesitation. Immediately, the prodigious knight knelt before the prince she had acknowledged, swearing her life to Adrian Leonberg. The spectators were stunned. In response, the first prince formally honored her as a knight, reciting the oath that sealed her position. The moment resembled a certain legendary knighting scene from a famous Western fantasy. In the following days, Arwen trained relentlessly. Her fellow knights could not believe that she had sworn loyalty to such a scoundrel prince. Rumors spread rapidly, suggesting indecent relationships and accusing the prince of using her as a mistress under the guise of knighthood. These ridiculous rumors deeply irritated Adrian, who still could not escape his disgraceful reputation. Like Lloyd Frontera, he was treated as scum by nearly everyone. Watching the prince endure this silently, the royal guard Carls recalled Adrian's words from the final day of the duel. Adrian had stated clearly that he did not desire a knight bound to him by royal duty alone. Those words had struck Carls deeply. Even so, Adrian reaffirmed that he stood by his belief. If the crown reassigned Carls elsewhere, then Carls would be obligated to follow orders rather than remain loyal to him. To ease the guard's heart, Adrian offered that Carls could swear an oath similar to Arwen's if he wished. With sincerity in his eyes, Carls asked whether the prince would accept such an oath. Surprisingly, Adrian declined, stating plainly that he had no interest in nurturing Carls. Though simple, his words were sincere. Shortly after, Adrian received official notice from the royal family. His probation period had been lifted, and he was granted permission to attend the upcoming banquet. What shocked him was that the probation had ended nearly 2 months early. Although the king had been furious at first, something had clearly changed his decision. Adrian had no idea what was going through the king's mind, nor did he care. He had never intended to leave the palace anyway. Soon after, a maid brought him a new invitation. It was for a social gathering between young lords, a place the former prince had frequented. The maid described it as an indecent place filled with debauchery. Adrian immediately rejected the idea until he noticed the sender. The invitation came from Bernardo of the Eli family. The name stirred memories passed down by his uncle. The Eli family had once supported the Manhart system and had fallen into ruin a century ago. Curious about his old friend's family, Adrian decided to attend, hoping they had not completely collapsed since his possession of Adrian Leonberg's body. By this time, Adrian had lost a significant amount of weight. A tailor prepared a custom outfit suited to his style. The transformation was shocking. The former fat prince now looked refined, almost model-like. Even Adrian was stunned by his own appearance while the tailor was left speechless. Adrian asked the tailor to prepare another outfit for the palace, noting that his measurements would likely change again. On the way to the gathering, Adrian reflected on how suffocating it felt to constantly be escorted by guards and attendants. During the ride, he noticed a scar on his maid's neck. She explained it was punishment for incompetence inflicted by the former cruel prince. Adrian felt genuine disgust toward his past self for traumatizing others. Despite seeing her often, he had never asked her name. Upon asking, he learned she was Adelia Byron. The name immediately caught his attention. The Byron family was barely mentioned in the noble registry, but its history was legendary. Long before cities existed, multiple races flourished, and humanity was hunted for its weakness. That changed during the Great War when humans rose as the strongest species. Among the 5 electors was a woman wielding the sword Gruhorn. She had stood alone before titanic monsters and slain Ida, the king of giants, with a single strike. She became known as the Iron-Blooded Sword, Marquis Agnes Byron. She was infamous for her brutal language and terrifying presence, to the point that even legends remembered her vividly. Adrian was stunned to realize that her descendants stood before him. It made him wonder how such a family had fallen so low. Soon after, Carls announced their arrival. Adrian exited the carriage and attempted to speak with Adelia, confusing both her and the royal guard. Outside, a silver-haired man welcomed him warmly. It was Bernardo of the Eli family, who expressed deep gratitude for Adrian's transformation. Inside the club, drunken nobles laughed and shouted. Bernardo was shocked by Adrian's behavior. The former scoundrel usually drank heavily and flirted openly, but now he remained silent. His presence alone felt different. When a drunk noble approached and mentioned rumors about Arwen, Adrian said nothing. As the man continued making lewd remarks, Adrian calmly asked if he had siblings. Upon learning the man had a younger brother, Adrian felt relieved. He struck the man with a punch so powerful that it sent him crashing to the floor. The room fell silent in terror. Adrian coldly declared the man's younger brother the new heir before continuing the beating. The crowd watched in horror as Adrian made an example of him. Using the moment to educate everyone, Adrian declared that he would no longer tolerate being treated like a scoundrel, even if people perceived him as one. His words confused the crowd, so he let his actions speak instead. Calling for Bernardo, who dropped to his knees instantly, Adrian reminded him of the promise he had made earlier that day. Bernardo hastily fled to summon the royal knights. The remaining guests stood frozen. Adrian ordered the women to leave and singled out one man attempting to escape. He allowed him to go, provided he never repeated his earlier behavior. The threat alone paralyzed the men. Adrian declared that their crimes included mocking royalty and insulting his knight. Royal guards arrived, led by Carls, who labeled them traitors. Adrian ordered that none be spared. In the aftermath, the prince was summoned by the king. 14 noble children had been arrested, and their families were enraged. With so many noble houses involved, the king now faced severe backlash. Adrian understood his father well and openly named the king's true fear, pointing out that the arrested individuals were outcasts and irredeemable trash regardless. He even advised his father to send letters to specific people, namely, the brothers and sisters of those arrested. Hearing this, the king coldly ordered Adrian to leave, and the prince did so without concern. The scene then returned to his earlier appointment with his maid. Despite Adrian's attempts to comfort Adelia, the girl broke down in tears, repeatedly asking what she had done so wrong. She resembled a frightened puppy that had been tormented by the former prince to the brink of collapse. Her family was not even recognized among proper nobles, and even the descendants of the Leonberg family seemed unaware of the significance of the Byrons. It was as if a portion of history had been erased. The peerless contributions of Agnes Byron were no longer remembered, and everything tied to the Byron family had seemingly vanished. Yet Adrian could clearly see Adelia's latent potential in swordsmanship. Her status was hidden, her traits absurdly powerful. For one, the trait Butcher activated upon exposure to blood. Another trait, War Maniac, marked her as someone obsessed with battle. At the same time, she possessed fragile heart and caregiver traits, making her naturally gentle and passive. Though Adelia possessed unrivaled swordsmanship and combat potential, none of her traits restrained her madness. Once unleashed, her rampage could spiral to the point where even Adrian considered whether setting her loose upon the world would be catastrophic. Still, letting such an S-rank talent go to waste was unthinkable. One trait in particular stood out, the slave mentality trait, which instilled unwavering loyalty toward a master. Using this as leverage, Adrian demanded that she swear absolute loyalty to him. The request confused her. She was already his maid. Adrian clarified that he wanted more. He wanted her to become his knight immediately. The frail, timid girl broke down again, refusing such a monumental role and insisting she was insignificant. Adrian, however, knew the truth of her lineage and promised to take responsibility for her. In return, she would swear loyalty and serve without question. If Adelia could not control her madness herself, then Adrian would control it for her. She hesitated, asking whether he truly intended to take responsibility for her family. When Adrian confirmed it, and even offered to summon them to the capital so she could see them any time, her resolve finally broke. Overwhelmed with gratitude, she swore her loyalty. Just like Arwen, Adelia recited the oath and pledged her life to the first prince. Adrian accepted and formally acknowledged her as a servant bound to obey his commands without question. He gently patted her hand, drawing a smile to her face. Even so, Adrian remained uneasy, questioning whether he had made the right decision. Rumors continued to swirl throughout the palace. Ever since he took over the body, whispers followed every step he took. People spoke of how quiet and unstable he seemed. They recalled how the former prince had summoned noble children, beaten them, and thrown them into dungeons for amusement. Now a new scandal had emerged, appointing a lowly maid as a personal knight, someone rumored to have never held a sword. Adrian understood that no matter what he did, hatred would follow him. Even this decision was twisted into claims that he was building a harem. More than anything, he despised how entitled others felt toward his life and choices. He never expected turning a maid into a knight to ignite such a storm. It felt as though everyone was waiting for him to fail. He imagined his father angrily complaining about cleaning up another mess, his uncle cursing him as usual, and his younger brother mocking him with smug superiority. The weight of it all dragged him down, until another maid burst in, announcing the queen's arrival. Adrian panicked instantly, silently begging the gods for mercy. Exhausted from endless confrontations, he had no strength left when his mother stormed in and added fuel to the fire. She scolded him harshly, claiming she truly believed he had changed, only to see him reverting to his old behavior. She declared it was time for him to properly enter society and marry. Once he chose a spouse, she insisted, he would finally settle down. Adrian barely understood what she was saying, but the queen did not care. Raising her voice, she ordered him to listen, reminding him that a mother was always right. She had decided he would marry. With that, she turned and left, abandoning Adrian in stunned silence. Later, Adrian summoned Adelia, who sat nervously before him. He explained several things, and she timidly asked whether she would truly gain mana. Adrian calmly confirmed that she would receive a special form, a mana heart. Using his own mana, he formed a heart within her body, reflecting on how this world had forgotten the legendary Sword Queen. He had not. He remembered her every movement, the living rhythm of her blade, and the pride that pulsed through her mana heart. He wished to awaken that destiny within Adelia. The mana heart took shape, and a system notification confirmed that the imprint was complete and stable. A soft golden light radiated from Adelia's chest, leaving her stunned. She whispered in disbelief, asking if that was truly mana. When the process ended, Adrian explained the refinement method and instructed her to practice whenever possible. Suddenly, Adelia's anxiety shifted as Adrian collapsed, scraping his knees. The strain had drained him completely. She rushed to help, but he waved her off, claiming he was merely tired. Hesitant, she asked how someone like him could choose a lowly maid like her. Adrian, out of patience, told her to leave. When she did not move, he asked why she was staring at him like a lost puppy. She immediately bowed, fear and respect mixing as she swore absolute loyalty for life. Satisfied, Adrian reminded her never to forget that he was her master. She accepted those words as a badge of honor, though quietly, she suspected she might remember them differently than he intended. A few days later, Cows reported that Bernardo Eli had been taken by the royal guard as a witness and placed under strict isolation. Adrian was puzzled that trials even existed and casually asked if he would need to attend. His knight replied that royalty never testified. Relief washed over Adrian, followed by unease. This was becoming far larger than expected. His attention drifted to Adelia. He asked how she had been feeling. Startled, she answered that her mana had stabilized. Adrian immediately declared that she would now train with him. He ordered her to change, meet him at the training grounds, and leave the cleaning cloth behind. From that moment on, she was a knight. At the training grounds, Adrian stretched calmly until his uncle Belhart interrupted him. Their exchange quickly turned sharp. Adrian's attention remained fixed on a girl struggling through laps. He openly stated that he was turning her into a knight, enraging Belhart. Accusations flew, with Belhart condemning the idea as reckless and foolish. Adrian snapped back, ordering him to stop meddling. Their argument escalated until Adelia completed her 10th lap and collapsed. Breathless, she apologized repeatedly. Adrian dismissed it and placed a wooden sword in her hands. He demonstrated basic stances and instructed her to mimic them. What followed stunned everyone. Adelia moved with fluid grace, like a dancer. Her posture was flawless, her sword perfectly aligned with each motion. Belhart and Adrian stared in disbelief as she replicated the techniques after seeing them once. When she finished, she softly asked if she had done it correctly. A chill ran down Adrian's spine. For the first time, fear took hold. If she continued at this rate, she might surpass him sooner than expected. Control only worked when the weak feared the strong. His thoughts broke when he noticed Belhart watching Adelia with a greedy glint in his eyes. Adrian steps closer and nudges his uncle, warning him to calm himself and not entertain any filthy ideas about her. Belhart only smirks and mocks him, saying that Adrian is still a novice who has held a sword for only a few months, and that someone like him cannot handle such overwhelming potential. That is where Adrian draws the line. He refuses to be talked down to. His mana heart surges to life, the same heart that holds the depth of the giant king, the light dragon, and beings who drank deeply from the blood of countless lives. A portion of his soul answers his anger and rises at his command. Red flames wrap around his body as his presence explodes outward. He stares at Belhart with ancient authority, his voice heavy and final as he declares that Adelia belongs to him. Adrian warns his uncle not to look at Adelia or even think about her, because he truly hates it when someone tries to claim what does not belong to them. In that moment, he suddenly realizes that his sense of reality is slipping away. His awareness fades into a strange state filled with cold and darkness where he can feel neither life nor death. He understands the danger immediately. At this rate, his body will merge with the sword, and his soul will be devoured by the demonic blade Blackhorn. Adrian knows he cannot allow that to happen. He fights back against the pull, confronts his inner demons, and forces the demonic power back into its cage. Slowly, he returns to himself as Prince Adrian, just in time to catch the end of his uncle's speech. The uncle speaks grandly about how one ordinary knight can save the lives of 10,000 soldiers and how a single outstanding knight can protect hundreds more. Adrian barely listens to him. His uncle is no longer just family, but the great frontier commander, the man who leads armies among corpses and war. Even so, Adrian has no interest in the lecture. His indifference irritates the uncle, and once again he begins to lash out at the boy. That is when Adelia finally speaks for herself. She declares that her body and soul belong to Adrian and that she will not follow the uncle's words. Adrian feels a spark of pride at her resolve and smirks toward his uncle. He calmly says that his original goal for the training was simply to help her lose weight, and now that she has come this far, he has nothing more to teach. He tells his uncle to leave and stop interfering in his business. The uncle storms away, stern and clearly irritated. Even after that day, he continues to visit the palace without stopping, watching Adelia and observing their training from a distance. Since Adrian has strictly forbidden him from stepping in or interfering, the uncle can do nothing but watch. Seeing that arrogant man struggle in silence becomes strangely entertaining for Adrian. Before long, Adelia once again takes her stance with the sword, and Adrian can hardly believe his eyes. She has already learned the sword's renaissance. He applauds her, genuinely pleased with her progress, and for the first time, Adelia herself looks proud. The peaceful moment does not last long. The uncle interrupts again and demands to know whether Adrian has taught her the mana heart as well. When Adrian confirms it, the uncle's anger explodes. He starts shouting, accusing Adrian of teaching her foolish tricks instead of keeping them to himself. Adrian turns sharply and orders him to leave at once. The uncle curses him, claiming there was a far better path and that Adelia had potential beyond imagination, which Adrian has now ruined. Adrian remains calm and tells his bodyguard to escort the uncle. The uncle refuses to be touched by a lowly guard and storms out on his own. After the tension fades, Adelia quietly asks Adrian if the techniques she is learning are really just petty tricks. Adrian firmly denies it. He tells her that his uncle does not understand what he is talking about. The truth, he explains, is that people of this modern era have completely forgotten what a real mana heart truly is. If they had not, they would never have thrown it away like a pair of broken shoes. With quiet certainty, Adrian vows that she will soon discover the true power of mana. Later, at the training ground, the uncle returns and places a wooden sword in front of Adrian, demanding that he prove himself. The uncle declares that he will use only a single ring, and if Adrian can force him to take even half a step back, then he will finally acknowledge Adrian's knowledge and power. Adrian picks up the sword and calmly asks what the bet is. The uncle replies that if Adrian wins, he will grant him one wish, anything he wants, even the family's secret techniques. It is not what Adrian truly wants, but for now he accepts the terms without hesitation. Adrian charges forward at once, aiming straight for his uncle's throat. The uncle only smirks and says it was obvious that Adrian would go for the neck. Just as predicted, Adrian attacks the uncle's throat again and again and again. Each strike is fast and sharp, but the uncle dodges every single one with ease. He moves effortlessly, avoiding the attacks until he finally blocks Adrian's sword and lightly nudges him back, asking if that is all he has. He then pushes Adrian away and mocks him, asking if he has already given his best. Adrian grits his teeth. He is stubborn, and he finds his uncle unbearably annoying, but he cannot deny one thing: his uncle is terrifyingly strong and smart. He is waiting for the moment Adrian draws out his mana, because only then can he deliver a far more crushing defeat. But Adrian is not going to give him that satisfaction. With that thought, he starts speaking to himself, finding it strange. 400 years ago, there were countless mana hearts, and knights who possessed a man heart achieved unbelievable feats. Yet when a somewhat useful skill appeared later, everyone simply forgot about the mana heart and adapted that new skill instead. Over time, people began to believe that the mana chain technique was a far superior method of mana management than the man heart. Bellheart hears him muttering and asks what exactly he is trying to say. Adrian calmly replies that he disagrees with that belief entirely and that the comparison itself is flawed. Adrian says it was never that the mana heart was weak. It was always that the owner was weak. He states clearly that not all mana hearts are fragile or inferior. He then asks Bellheart if he has ever heard of the heroic martial poem. Bellheart snaps at him to stop talking, saying that the training ground is a place for trading blows and swords, not a place for songs and poems. Adrian only smirks and tells him that he is a fool for calling the mana heart a low-level technique. With that, Adrian begins to recite the poem that is engraved deep within his chest. He sings of 100 battles won against 20 trainees who all dreamed of becoming heroic martial warriors. As the words flow, the heroic martial form takes shape. Power begins to surge through him. With every line he recites, the strength of those victories pours into his body, into his arms, and finally into his blade. Slowly, his sword begins to glow, answering the poem with its own rising light. The system notification shows that the effects of the poem of sparring have been activated, and mana flows all around Adrian. But Belhart remains unimpressed, saying that no matter what Adrian does, it will not matter. As long as Adrian relies on the mana heart, it cannot surpass the mana chain. Adrian charges at his uncle, and Belhart dodges effortlessly with his sword. The mana of the ring pushes the mana heart's flow backward, causing Adrian to fly slightly back. But in truth, to master the poem, Adrian has trained over 100 times and endured the ring's mana over 1,000 times during those 100 matches. He experienced 1,000 waves of opposing mana. He strikes down with his sword, unleashing the power of the stained sai. His blade now feels fully presentable, but when he attacks again, Belhart dodges once more. Adrian presses on, striking repeatedly, and for the first time, Belhart begins to show concern. Belhart gathers his full power, pushing Adrian away. He tells Adrian he is arrogant to claim that not all mana hearts are equal. He slams his sword into the ground, causing an explosion that throws Adrian backward against the wall. Belhart announces that he is bored with this fight and declares that it is over because he has already won. Adrian, however, realizes that at a common rank, the heroic martial points alone are inefficient. He uses his sword to rise to his feet and begins recounting the history from 400 years ago. He explains how the knights made a critical mistake. They left no enemies for their descendants. They believed their stories, sword techniques, beating of the heart, and poems of their victories would pass down intact. But this new world has forgotten the songs of dragons and giant kings, turning them into myths too absurd to be true. Belhart does not listen at all. He believes Adrian is daydreaming and cannot understand a word of what he is saying. Adrian grows tired of the games and thinks of his uncle as an arrogant and foolish knight. Suddenly, the darkness of the sword's demon, Blackhorn, rises like a storm above Adrian's eyes. He declares that if Belhart does not understand true power, he will teach him. The demon's hands fully consume Adrian's body and mind as he begins chanting the dragon-slaying poem. His body strains under the immense power. Some parts of the song are omitted because of his lower rank, but one powerful verse remains. Adrian repeats the mantra again and again. The sheer energy of this verse strikes Belhart with force. Adrian attacks, and Belhart realizes that if this continues, he could die. Another explosion erupts, sending Adrian flying backward into the ground. When the dust settled, Belhart revealed that he was not using a single minor ring as promised, but a full pentagon of rings. Adrian, however, was thrilled. Even with all 4 rings active, his sword remained untouched, slicing through the ring's mana with the power of the mana heart. He rose to his feet, leaving Belhart stunned and confused. Belhart had respected the ring's mana to surpass the man-heart, yet it could not. Adrian looked directly at his uncle and declared calmly and firmly that he had lost. Later, the dragon's song and the sword battered Adrian's frail human body. He clawed at the sheets, teeth gritted, cursing that damn Gesta Sanctorum. He knew the pain was the price for forcefully drawing out the power of Gesta Sanctorum, the poem of the decapitated dragon. His body was now in tatters, but he knew it was worth every risk. This was his first martial feat that he wove entirely himself, and he felt proud of it. He recited the poem again and again from his heart. The system showed that his rank as god of duels had slightly increased, and he thought it would be enough for the duel with the third prince. Suddenly, Adelia interrupted him. Beaming with joy because he had finally regained consciousness, she told him how, after he collapsed, the queen was furious at Belhart, and it was the first time she had seen her so angry. Deep down, Adrian felt a little pleased, thinking it served his uncle right to be scolded by the queen. Adelia also told him that Belhart had asked to be informed as soon as Adrian woke up. Adrian did not like the idea. He lay down, telling her that he had woken just long enough to know and that he wanted to rest. He knew that if he did not properly recover the spirit damaged by excessive use of Gesta Sanctorum, he would pay a terrible price. Memories of realities in the past would mix into chaos, and eventually the boundary of reality would collapse in his mind. He would become a madman, good for nothing. Trapped in the sword's memories again, even thinking about that hole made him shudder, because it was the worst fate he could imagine. Then he told Adelia about her ancestor Agnes Baron, a legendary swordsman, and how she should be able to inherit the powers of Gesta Sanctorum. Adelia imagined how incredible her ancestor must have been. Adrian explained that in order to fully benefit from the poem, she would need to grow far stronger than she was. He asked her what she truly wanted to learn. Adelia was stunned by the question, her eyes widening, and she hesitated, stuttering repeatedly. Finally, she blurted out her heart, declaring that she wanted to become a swordsman like Adrian. Hearing this, Adrian froze, utterly stunned by her words. Apparently, some Gesta Sanctorum began with the sound of a driving trumpet, while others started with the first step across a plain. Some began with a heartfelt oath, just like the oath Adelia was taking right now in front of Adrian. She swore to sacrifice her life for him and dedicate everything she had into 5 things for his sake. The system showed that she was offering a point of subordination. Adrian felt the power and presence of it, realizing that this was Adelia's gesta sanctorum. Some gesta sanctorum also influenced others, and in this case, a new gesta sanctorum formed, creating a point of domination. The point of subordination was a link between a master and a servant, and Adrian was stunned. The descendant of the Sword Queen had conceived this form of subordination in front of him, granting him a miracle he never expected. He smiled, thinking of all the powers he would now have as long as Adelia's subordination targeted him. Her growth would also benefit his own work. He thanked her for her kindness, and Adelia gazed at him in admiration. Adrian did not yet know what kind of help or advantage she would give him, but he felt certain about the future. A few days later, Adrian was in the kingdom, bored out of his mind. His mother approached him, asking if he was feeling a little better. Adrian did not like being questioned, and he struggled with people who were cherished by the body's original owner. He was just as awkward with his mother, who looked somewhat defeated. She asked if he resented his uncle and then tried to cover for him, saying that he did not truly mean harm, so even if Adrian had hard feelings, he should just shake them off. When Adrian replied that he did not feel that way, she screamed that he definitely should. Adrian was confused, wondering what she really wanted from him. Ever since he had blown away his pride and arrogance that day, it had been hard for him to endure. That day, he planted a heart demon inside his uncle's mind. If Belhard could not overcome it, the demon would grow, and he would lose his proud martial powers. Adrian did not care about the consequences for his uncle. That would be his own loss. His mother said that his uncle had spent his whole life closer to swords than anyone else, which made him clumsy and rough in mind. But recently, Bernhard seemed fond of Adrian and even personally persuaded the king to lift his confinement early. As soon as it was lifted, Adrian threw a temper tantrum, putting his uncle in a difficult position. Adrian realized then that his uncle had legitimate reasons to be angry, yet he still acted like a spoiled, ungrateful brat, thinking, what did he even do? While in recovery, an old scholar named Niccolo Marciadel was called in to serve as his tutor. Naturally, Adrian Leonberger refused to play along. The old scholar, Carls, and Adelia watched as the prince rolled around the floor, throwing a tantrum. Niccolo tried to give him some encouraging words, but the spoiled prince took it the wrong way once he calmed down a little. Adrian insisted that there was no need for a lesson when he already knew everything he needed to know. Niccolo suggested an alternative. They could just hang out and engage in a conversation covering several topics if he could prove that he didn't need help. The scholar promised never to visit again. By the end of the day, the prince was blazing with passion as he openly took part in academic debates about the nature of man. Niccolo even suggested a book for him to peruse based on the topic they delved into. In this text, the relationship between ruler and subject was represented as a kind of contract. Monarchs provided a portion of military and economic power to the keys of power, and the keys of power kept the monarch on the throne through loyalty. For all the years he had lived as Gyuhan, Adrian came to believe that relationships were supposed to be give and take. Before he knew it, the whole day had been spent. The old scholar tidied up the desk and concluded the session. When Niccolo said his goodbyes, the prince was smiling from ear to ear. He had never had so much fun just yapping away. As soon as he heard the door shut, Adrian realized what had happened. He had just been finessed into attending a full-blown lecture against his will. The old man was quite sly, but Niccolo was also surprised by the first prince. The kid was very different from how the rumors depicted him. Forbidden from training and free from Niccolo's lessons, the prince's schedule was clear for the day, and he was bored. Before he could agonize about his life choices and bedrock agesta, namely his uncle Bale Belhard made him stand up. Adelia welcomed him. It had been a few days since the last sparring match. Bale looked ghastly. He hadn't been able to overcome the inner demon planted by his nefarious nephew today. The uncle had only come by to say his apologies. He had broken the promise he made to himself and caused the prince great injury for it. He wouldn't make any excuses. Even though Adrian's injuries were the painful fruits of overexertion, his uncle must have been agonizing over the troubles of injuring royalty to correct mistakes. Uncle Bale offered to give the kid anything he could possibly ask for. If he had to give up his eyes or arms to settle the score, he would. In the end, Adrian felt bad for this talented man trapped by such a trivial inner demon and decided to be generous. The first prince stated his demand. He just wanted to go out for a bit. His forced confinement was over, so he should be free to go. But the prince wasn't talking about a one-day trip. He planned to wander far outside the capital. Setting the schedule would take time, and they couldn't aim for somewhere too far either. Bale accepted his request and immediately got to work to make it happen. After his uncle left, the prince was left in the room with Carls. He thought the boss would demand something more unreasonable. You don't get the favor of a count every day. After all, frankly, Adrian just wanted the old man to stop acting so stiff and pathetic, so he asked for something manageable. Hearing the boss speak so candidly cracked him up that night. Suddenly, Adelia entered the room with a long-awaited letter in hand. It was a neat update log from Lady Arwen Gurgyan. She had undergone a small breakthrough and would be able to visit soon. The message was short and sweet, a perfectly timed piece of good news. 5 days later, Uncle Bale sent word that everything had been taken care of. After 2 more days, the day of departure arrived. The first place they'd be passing through was called Ellen. The prince was so excited he couldn't sit his seat down. You see, the county of Ellen was the royal palace's best armament production site. It had an iron mine to supply high-quality material and a blacksmith's workshop built to refine it. More than half of the weapons and armor delivered to the royal family came from Ellen. Since Adrian's level had risen a lot lately, he had been itching to find a new blade of his own. Originally, he planned to pick up a nice sword from the royal armory. Unfortunately, he was blocked by a royal order from the king. Considering how the prince was moving, he couldn't really blame his father. At least he couldn't score a proper weapon outside the palace. Surprisingly, Adrian was taking the excursion seriously. Thus, the approximately 20-day journey had begun. 3 days from the capital, they would reach the first stop, Ellen. Afterwards, they would venture for another 2 days toward the Iron Lion Castle. Currently, Adrian was stuck sitting inside a carriage for 3 whole days, bored out of his mind. Adelia was sitting across from him. She was no fun either. Maybe his time would be better spent checking on his mana heart instead. Currently, his tank was empty. As a side effect of overstraining the use of the dragon-slaying poem, it should be safe to start filling it up again. Slowly, he sensed the rattling vibration of the carriage, the cold draft of the wind, and the chatter of knights, and gathered the specks of mana born from those things. Eventually, he was able to reform and fill his empty mana heart. Much to his surprise, the mana heart he conjured was much bigger than the last. This was just a small glimpse of the greater will. It was the influence of forcing himself to use the poem. His physical constitution underwent a qualitative change, expanding his mana heart and improving its ability to store more energy through unconventional means. He reached the level of sword expert, strengthening his connection with the source and lifting the restriction on some of his authorities. His third eye and third ear had been upgraded significantly. Overall, a single meditation session had pushed him to a different level. He could feel the drastic change in every little movement. He had taken another step forward after those long 3 days of carriage riding. When the caravan finally reached Ellen, the first prince was respectfully welcomed and personally escorted by Edgar and Torrance Ellen, sons of the city lord. In consideration of their long journey, Edgar offered to guide everyone to their rooms first. Walking around the Ellen mansion, Adrian saw why this county was dubbed the production center for armaments. The halls were filled with all sorts of weapons. Upon closer inspection, however, the blades on display were just flashy pieces, useless hunks of metal in actual combat. Based on first impressions, Adrian doubted he would find what he was looking for in this place. He asked to be taken to the blacksmith guild within the territory. Edgar gladly granted his request. On the way, the local lord warned the prince that blacksmiths were rough and stubborn people. When completely immersed in their work, they would not notice even if the lord visited. Edgar gave Adrian a long preamble to respect the craftsman's spirit, even if it might seem a tad offensive. The heat of the furnace was intense as they walked into the room where the magic happened. The air was filled with the noise of iron being forcefully hammered. The flames roared, the bellows hissed. The blacksmiths worked fire and iron in perfect harmony. Among the artisans in the room, one exceptionally clear sound took the prince's breath away. An old man diligently forging a sword in the middle of the room caught Adrian's undivided attention. For some reason, every rhythmic beat of the hammer reminded Adrian of his first memory as Grahan. Adelia wiped the sweat off her lord's cheek, knocking the prince out of his nostalgic daydream. While the rest of the forge had stopped working to offer their humble greetings to the prince, the old man continued his focused efforts. Edgar introduced the man leading the welcome committee as Saxon, head of the blacksmith guild. Adrian didn't give a damn. All he wanted to do was watch the master class of forging in front of him. Saxon tried to curry favor with royalty and yelled at the old man to stop working and show some respect to the prince. Adrian had to grab that son of a bitch by the mouth to stop him from messing things up. Based on the empty workbenches and uncomfortable looks he was getting from the other blacksmiths, it seemed that the head of the guild had dragged everyone out without being asked to do so. As a sign of respect, he implored the blacksmiths to get back to work. With everyone back in their rightful stations, the prince locked in and continued watching absolute mastery. He just stood there, watching a shirtless old man beat his hammer into some hot steel repeatedly. The prince was completely engrossed by the process. He was in the midst of a burning world. For all the years of his existence, he had never felt this sensation before. After they left the forge, Edgar explained that the old man had been repeatedly forging and melting the same sword for the past half-year. Every sword the man forged was said to be a masterpiece. He wasn't called the master artisan for nothing. None of his creations lacked in quality, yet he melted them all down the same. Furthermore, for the past month, the old man had barely slept. He had devoted himself completely to his work. Given his age, it was a bit worrisome. Several days after they reached Ellen, the prince made it a habit to visit the forge early and leave late at night, watching the master artisan continue the intense daily routine in silence. Contrary to the tension caused by the first prince's arrival, he caused no incidents at all. His stay in Ellen eventually reached its last day. On the day of departure, the master artisan was working harder than usual. The prince had hoped to stay until he could see the final product, but who knew how long that would take? He could only leave with a deep sense of regret. There were countless matters to attend to. On the eve of their departure, Adrian commanded his people to prepare a farewell banquet. After the banquet, Edgar came running to his door first thing in the morning, excitedly yelling about the master artisan's finished sword, hyped as hell. The prince ran towards the forge and saw the old man holding a majestic weapon, gently cleaning the edges of his newest deadly creation. Once it was completely clean and sharp, the master artisan willingly surrendered the weapon to the prince. Looking at the blade, Adrian could visualize the words that perfectly encapsulated the moment. It was a weapon heated like the sun rising on the horizon and cooled until its hue matched the royal crimson robes. A sword akin to the sun, and the king was born. When it came to naming the sword, the artisan suggested the moniker Damarung. To the artisan, it meant twilight. To the prince, it would be the dawn. Once the weapon was surrendered to its rightful owner, exhaustion quickly caught up with the old man. Before he could collapse on the floor, the prince caught the master artisan. Sensing the weak pulse in the old man's body, Adrian decided to spend one more night at Ellen. On his deathbed, the old man recounted the moment he saw the prince watch him work. On that first day, the sword took shape in his mind. As if guided by fate, the sword itself had chosen the day it would be born. Knowing that the artisan was already on the way to the afterlife, Grahan decided to be truthful and revealed his secret. Surprisingly, the old man took the revelation quite well. A blacksmith and a former sword understood each other's hearts best. As his final request, the artisan extended his quivering hand and asked to hold the last sword he had forged for one moment. Holding the handle, he blessed the sword to be as great as its owner once was. Adrian promised that it would be, and the old man finally croaked. When the sun came up, Edgar came running back to the prince's tent to glaze the new sword, Damarung, a blade forged with one's very soul. He tried to convince the prince that the old man's sword was not suitable for wielding, and that he should use a magic sword instead. Though not top tier, the magic sword presented by Edgar was at least a fine mid-grade weapon. Seeing through Edgar's scheme, the prince shamelessly took the magic sword and refused to give up Damarung. To make sure he wouldn't be pushed back, he leveraged the loyalty of the Ellen family to the crown. All the sly noble could do was swallow the loss and play it cool. He had planned to lure the prince with a flashy magic sword in exchange for the master's blade, only to end up giving away two precious weapons for free. With no more delays, the caravan rolled out. The cavalry rode ahead at full speed, while the carriages and infantry followed at a measured pace. To make up for the delays, they had to hurry. On the way up to his carriage, the prince bumped into Uncle Bale. They had barely seen each other the entire time they were in Ellen, since Bale was busy with a separate task. From now on, they would be writing their path to the Iron Lion Fortress by nightfall. Funnily enough, the prince didn't know how to ride a horse. He had been a literal sword for God knows how long, so how would he know how to ride a horse? The road to Iron Lion Castle was messy. He had to learn how to ride on the way. There was a lot of puking, crazy horse wheelies, and very preventable twists and turns. Even if it wasn't the half-day journey originally planned, they managed to reach the destination in roughly a full day's ride. The prestige of the Iron Lions from the House of Wool Roden was embodied by the welcome party arranged to receive the noble scion of Leon. These lions were a lot more spirited than expected. The reason was obvious. These boys must not have been happy that their goddess was snagged away by a wastrel prince. Thinking it would be fun to provoke the lions, Adrian confidently walked towards Arwen. Once face to face, the honorable knight bent her knee and gave the most respectful greeting to her lord. The Iron Lions almost pounced on the first prince. Right then and there, their reaction was immediate, but so was Adelia Byron's. If Adelia had lost her bearings to hostility at this moment, it would have been bad news. The prince had to snap her out of her boiling, murderous rage. It was a good thing he had been developing her subservience constantly. He turned back to Arwen and invited the Thorny Rose to follow him somewhere else. There were many stories they hadn't shared yet. It would be better if the lion stayed behind. The prince's first stop upon arrival was the training grounds. He was very eager to witness the Iron Lions, who were said to be the best in the kingdom, in action. Adrian issued an open challenge for anyone brave enough to step up, but his status as first prince was a bit burdensome, so he pledged under the Leonberger name that no one would be held accountable for the results of any duels. Today, when coddling them didn't work, he resorted to provoking the lions. If no one crossed swords with him, their world-renowned reputation must be nothing but a bluff, right? Unable to take the trash talk any longer, Dale of the House Tenant stepped up to the plate. He claimed to be far from worthy of representing the sword of the Iron Lions, but he was ready to make a stand. The prince was just glad, someone actually. For his rage bait, Dale decided to take the initiative and charged with his wooden blade drawn. Adrian received the first exchange with a thunderous response that wrecked Dale's body from the inside out. His redhead slid across the muddy floors of the training ground. One down, a lot more to go. The prince implored the knights to line up and try him. Next on the chopping block was Paul Rothheim, the third year, as opposed to freshman Dale. As expected, the babyface knight was clobbered without a fight. Hallie, a fifth-year apprentice, thought he got the better of the prince. He didn't. Judith followed suit, and the prince gave him equal treatment, equal fights. Every person sent by the proud Iron Lions lost in a spectacular fashion. This beatdown went on for half a day. Adrian never sustained a single scratch. After cleaning up the apprentices, the prince felt the itch to mess with the official members of the Knight Order, to stir some more trouble. He loudly announced that Arwen would be coming with him on the way home. The Thorny Rose didn't show any hesitation and accepted her lord's whim. This simple trick prompted one of the official members of the Iron Lions to stand up and speak. The knight had heard about the prince's love of gambling. He suggested a small bet to liven things up. Before the knight could foolishly embarrass himself, Adrian put his foot down and established that Arwen was not a prize for a tournament. They should just wager something else instead. He threw the worn-down training sword aside and asked Edgar for a real blade. The first prince unsheathed the magic sword and put it on the line for a duel. Anyone with decent eyes could see the value of the magic sword. Uncomfortable with the arrangement, Arwen tried to volunteer as the prize, but she was simply 1,000 times more precious than a mere sword. The value of a future swordmaster was incomparable to forged steel. Dunham of House Fahrenheit accepted the challenge as an official Iron Lion knight. He was on the verge of breaking through a triple chain, though he was basically at double chain. His sword was the 17th blade made by the master artisan. To keep it fair, he was also willing to bet this treasured weapon in single combat. Taking this fight a little more seriously, the prince decided to use his main weapon. As the master's 100th and final work, completed only a few days ago, Dunham stoked his chains. Although he disagreed with the sword path the prince was walking, the efforts to get there were evident. Out of respect for that, Dunham vowed to give this duel his best. Adrian would never get used to people criticizing him, referring to his mana heart as the wrong path. He had learned that the respect directed towards him should belong to his hardworking peers. Instead, the prince implored his knight-in-training, maid Adelia, to watch closely what was about to go down. This path was the one the two of them would be walking, affected by her presence. Towards Aura, Adelia unconsciously matched his frequency from behind. Without fail, she was ready to do whatever the prince wanted and needed.